Hello, everyone, and welcome to the virtual Happy Half Hour. We'll be getting started here in just a moment while we wait for folks to join us. Just a note that today's webinar will be recorded and sent out to our participants. And again, I want to welcome everyone to the virtual Happy Half Hour for July 16th. And today we are going to be talking about KPIs in baseball, how to measure runs and revenue that win. My name is Michelle Richardson, and I'm the Vice President of Sales Performance Research here at the Brooks Group. And it is a celebration of summer with a topic of KPIs. And this is something that Russ and I get asked about quite frequently in our conversations with customers. How do we set our KPIs? How do we know if we have the right ones? What are the best ways to measure and track our KPIs? So we're going to be talking about all of that with a baseball theme, a little sprinkling of some Moneyball in there as well. And speaking of baseball and Russ, I am happy to be joined by our resident Dodgers fan and sales expert, Russ Scherer. Welcome, Russ.
Thanks, Michelle. And coming for the very first time, not just on a Friday, but I'm actually in our office in Greensboro. And I just got this weird alert on my phone. I guess there's something like rain going on out there. There's flash flooding. Those of us in Southern California haven't seen that for a very long time. But welcome, everyone. And we are glad you're here. We are excited to be able to talk about this and to have a little fun. Look, it's the middle of July. And so if you're here and joining us, we want to be able to talk about not just the fun of baseball and how it ties to statistics, because it is a statistical based game, but even we'll talk about some Moneyball and kind of how you change the way in which the statistics that you measure goodness and greatness are important to be able to compete. And that's really kind of what we're about today. So Michelle, if you want to, I guess we should mention that our sponsor today is the summer sales packs from the Brooks Group. What we've done is help you build a beach bag full of different things to help your team. Combinations of some webinars, some articles, some blog posts, some podcasts, really letting you zero in on whatever area it might be that you feel your team needs to be refreshed a little bit this summer while they are refreshing themselves physically. Our agenda, we're going to start with sort of what are the best kinds of KPIs we're hearing today? What are the industry saying are the best practices? And then we'll talk a little bit about the movement through classics, what I call Keystone KPIs, and then really look at two key areas that have changed the most, I believe, in sales KPIs. One is the number of those that focus on in-process, things that we can use to adjust on our way to success, as opposed to waiting until the end to see if it's there. And then contribution. And we're going to talk about that from a couple of different angles as well. Our goal is not only to share some new KPIs with you, but also to spur your thinking about what are those levers of success that you might have. So Michelle, before we let all this time slip away, why don't you talk to us about the AllStar Approach?
Sounds good, Russ. Thank you. And in honor of our baseball theme and to recognize the Major League Baseball All-Star game that was earlier this week, I have dubbed this the AllStar Approach. So this is really about what high growth companies do differently. What are they doing relative to KPIs that's really putting them on track to grow faster than their peers? The data that I'm about to show you all today is from a survey conducted by ZS Associates. It was published back in October 2020. It is recent, but they had surveyed more than 200 middle market executives across several industries, and they identified what they called a high growth cohort that demonstrated a revenue growth rate over the past 3 years of 15%. And they measured those organizations against a lower growth cohort out of the same industry. So taking those organizations that are growing at a much faster rate and looking at what they were doing in terms of KPIs. So one thing I want to mention too is that these organizations were not measuring more KPIs per se, but they were really looking at different KPIs. They were reviewing them and adapting them more frequently and sharing them across the organization on a wider basis. And we're going to get into each of those. So let's take a look at what this AllStar approach is, as I like to call it. So number one, these high growth companies curate their KPIs. That was their first overall strategy, best practice approach. And by that, we mean they boil down what's most important to their business objectives. And I know that sounds kind of common sense, but really taking a look at what it is the organization is trying to achieve and making sure that that's what they were tracking in terms of KPIs, no more, no less. Again, as I said, these high growth companies are measuring roughly the same number of KPIs, 23 versus 21 that the lower growth cohort was measuring. But roughly half of those high growth companies had tracked new KPIs within the last year. So that means that they were looking at the KPIs they had, they were more likely to adopt new KPIs and abandon those that were not useful. So again, 50% of those high growth companies had tracked new KPIs in the last year compared to 34% of those lower growth companies. So the advice to you all is to really evaluate your current metrics against their usefulness and importance. Do they drive the right decision making? If you're in sales, do they give you actionable information? And do they drive the right behaviors for your team? And kind of use that as your measuring stick for those KPIs. These organizations, these high growth all-stars, also revisit their KPIs with regular cadence. And we kind of alluded to that by saying that the high growth companies track new KPIs in the last year, but even more so, these organizations revisit their KPIs regularly. They have a standard cadence for going back, looking at their metrics and determining whether they need to be adjusted. So 80% of the high growth companies in this survey evaluate their KPIs on a yearly basis. And interestingly enough, about 25% of those also review them even more frequently on a quarterly basis. So thinking about, particularly if you're in a fast changing environment, much like all of us have been in the last year to year and a half, if you're in a quick changing environment, if you have a seasonal business, if you have aggressive growth goals, it may be worth your time to set regular KPI reviews more frequently than just on a yearly basis.
And Michelle, that's looking at the KPIs themselves, not just looking at the numbers associated with those particular KPIs, right?
Exactly, yes. So obviously we want to be looking at the data itself on a regular basis, but actually evaluating whether the KPI is getting you the information that you need as an organization, as a leadership team, to drive the results that you need, to make the business decisions that are critical for your business. So it's not just looking at the data, it's looking to make sure that you are measuring the right data and making adjustments regularly versus just kind of setting the numbers and forgetting, or setting the metrics and forgetting it for a longer period of time. These all-star companies, these high growth companies also use what we're calling calculated KPIs. I do want to preface that, or kind of modify that and say they use them somewhat sparingly, and they make sure they're easy to understand and lead to clear decisions. So when we talk about calculated KPIs, we're talking about metrics that have multiple data points rather than a single data point. What do I mean by that? As you can see, 50% of our high growth companies track customer lifetime value as a metric. That would be contrasted to just tracking average customer spend. So lifetime value would factor in lifetime spend, purchase frequency, and maybe even overall life cycle of a customer. How long do your customers tend to stay with you? And that gives you a more nuanced view when you're going to make decisions, particularly if you're looking at your overall customer acquisition costs, how to target your marketing spend and your marketing investment, and which customers to track or to target. So looking at multiple data points rather than single data points can give you a more balanced, nuanced, and informed view for your business decisions. Other examples would be tracking win rate or pipeline advance rate. Again, multiple data points versus, say, just the number of opportunities in each step of your sales process. So you're looking at data points that can give you just that bigger picture, that more informed picture. So again, you're wanting to take a look at your business objectives. What is it you're trying to really drive? What decisions are you trying to make? And what's the best metric for helping to inform those decisions? Number 4, our high growth companies also use KPIs to connect the organization. So in other words, they share their KPIs across different departments. For instance, our average high growth companies share 12 KPIs with their sales reps, in contrast to 8 KPIs that are shared with sales reps in the lower growth companies. 32% of those are shared value and volume of opportunities across pipeline stages, that kind of thing. Things that can help, again, bring the sales reps together, help them understand the impact that they are having on the organization. And that's beyond just their individual KPIs. We know salespeople have their own number to hit, but these organizations are sharing team-wide KPIs for the organization. And again, that's helping them understand the impact to the organization and how they can contribute and move the needle when necessary. Some other shared KPIs to consider would be 1 or 2 that you could share across the organization relative to things like customer satisfaction or net promoter scores. We would also recommend a shared scorecard between sales and marketing. Some of the most popular shared metrics between sales and marketing would be leads by source and pipeline velocity. So these types of metrics can drive alignment between departments, promote transparency within the organization, and really help inform conversations. And as I've been saying with all of these, more informed business decisions.
And Michelle, one of the things I've seen, sometimes public companies are concerned about sharing too much information too widely. And what I've seen in that case is that people have abstracted the information. So instead of talking about, here's our revenue number, how much revenue we've achieved, they're talking about percentages, or they're talking about points. So what's important is to have something that's simple to understand, that less than 1, for example, means not good, and over 1 means good, or vice versa, whatever it might be.
Absolutely. And that is a great point. You do have to balance the data that you share, and as you said, with particularly with public companies, and also that transparency with your organization. So finding a way to unite your different departments and really connect them around common metrics, that's really the most important thing, and to figure out a way to do that works within your organization and their culture. Our final recommendation and best practice would be to keep your dashboards or your reporting simple, and I don't have on here, but just as important, simple and actionable. This is especially critical for sales managers who are going to be using this data to coach your sales reps. But make sure that when you're sharing your KPIs with the various departments, that these are KPIs that are relevant to those departments. They're easy to read, they're easy to interpret the data, and they don't have to go around, your individuals don't have to go around the multiple reports to try to do calculations and find the data. So obviously, we've recommended that you use some calculated KPIs, but try to make that reporting as simple as possible. What ZS associates found in this survey was the less time your sales managers in particular spent finding data, the more time they could devote to coaching. And in fact, when managers could devote more time to coaching, say 2 hours to 3 hours difference in coaching, it actually led to higher goal attainment. And in this case, they reported 19% higher goal attainment when your managers could be spending more time in their coaching. So making sure that they have the right data, it's easy to find, it's simple, and it's actionable. Those are the most important things in terms of making sure that data is usable.
And
so these are
sorry, Michelle, there's a whole series of new software tools that are able to pull data from disparate systems. If you've got 3 or 4 different systems, including Excel spreadsheets that you're forecasting on, and present really easy to understand graphical systems. I worked for a company a few years ago. They actually had 4 different accounting systems, one in each of the different regions. And trying to pull those together would have been impossible if not for a tool we implemented that was very colorful graphics, could show in very simple green, yellow, red, where we were ahead, where we were behind, and all done by non-IT professionals. The people in finance or people in product management or sales operations all built dashboards that they could share very easily and quickly with folks.
That is a great point. And I know I have worked with clients who one of their biggest complaints was trying to find the data and would spend hours going from spreadsheet to report to system to really aggregate the information that they needed. So what's the most efficient way to get that data? And again, to non-IT people in particular. We do have a question that came through the chat, and that is, will this a copy of this recording be provided? And yes, it will. So that will be going out likely later today.
Well, I think it's time for Take Me Out to the Ball Game. Isn't that the case? Our 7th inning stretch?
Exactly. Yes. So before we get into your part of the program, Russ, it is time for the 7th inning stretch, or as we also like to call it, a word from our sponsor. Russ, you mentioned that we are brought to you all today by our Summer Variety Pack. It is an all-new program for 2021. It features our award-winning virtual e-learning program, Impact U. It also has podcasts, micro-learning, white papers, webinars. There are some topics in those webinars on negotiation, lead generation, selling to the C-suite. For those of you that are looking for metrics to measure how your salespeople are doing going through this program, there are quizzes incorporated as well. So these are bite-sized learnings. It can be incorporated in between sales calls, summer vacation, and innings of the baseball game. So you can work in a lesson in between the 7th and 8th inning. So for more information on the Summer Variety Pack, it's a great way to keep learning going, to keep skill development going throughout the summer. Please email us at contact@thebrooksgroup.com, and producer Rich is going to put that access information up for you.
And much more interesting than watching ESPN cover yet another Yankees-Red Sox game on Monday night. Sorry if you're a Yankee or a Red Sox fan.
Yes, and
All right.
We didn't have any music, and I did not sing Take Me Out to the Ball Game, but I think that's best for everyone. So Russ, what have you got?
All right. Well, many of you have probably either read the book or seen the movie about Moneyball. And unfortunately, I think that the title didn't really do the idea and the concept justice. If you remember, Billy Beane worked for the Oakland Athletics. He was constrained in terms of what he had to work with. And he was working with a bunch of people who were all playing by the same rules. They're all measuring the same things. Was a player a 5-tool player? Could they, run, throw, hit, catch, etc.? And what was their batting average? And based on that, they were assigning players, and at least those who would play every day. Pitchers had a whole different set. And what Billy Beane said was, let's think about this differently. Let's think about what we're trying to accomplish. He said, if we're going to win games, we've got to score runs. If we're going to score runs, we've got to get on base. So let's take a look at the things that drive total bases, and created a score called OPS. It's a combination of on base and slugging numbers. And I'll just do a little bit here. He would look at a particular player and he'd add up all the hits and the walks and hits by pitch that they achieved over a period of time, and divided it by at-bats. And then they added to that slugging percentages. How many total bases did they get for appearances? So if I hit a home run, I get a 4. If I get a double, I get a 2. If I get an out, I get a 0. And by putting those together, that OPS metric, he changed the rules. He began to think about players differently. And so you've got an all-star player like Max Muncy, who maybe his batting average isn't over 300 like it used to be looked at for somebody important, but Max has one of the highest walk ratios in the league. He's also been hit by pitches many times. There are other players who get hit by the pitches. And what Billy Beane said was, look, I don't care how they get there, but if they're on base and the more people I put on base, the better chance I've got of winning. And we now also kind of have that same issue because we've got to change the rules. Let me just give you a statistic. Today in our society, in our world, there are 306 billion emails sent every day. And so I know you feel like most of those probably end up in your in basket, but the idea is that just sending emails isn't going to work like it used to. And there are great tools that will tell you even how to start your email. I found this really interesting. They went back and looked at 200 emails last fall, and they determined that if the average rate for opening was a 1, that if I started the email by saying, hello, Michelle, I would only get a 0.91 opening. If I started with, hi, Michelle, I would get a 1.01. And if I said, hey, Michelle, I would get a 1.23. Now, interesting information, but if the overall rate for opening emails is somewhere down in the 2% range, multiplying that by 0.91 or 1.23 isn't going to change much. And we've all seen cold calls also, especially through COVID, become less and less effective. So what are we going to do? Well, let's take a look at some of the old school KPIs. These were probably the most popular ones when before COVID hit. People really still measure them. And there's some oldies and goodies here, right? Monthly revenue growth is always going to be something that's important because that's what management is looking for. Gross profit or gross margin are also going to be really important. But both of those are what we call end process oriented goals. In other words, I don't really know where it is until the end of the month. That final day, for those of you who measure by month, there's always that scramble the last 2 or 3 days of a month or a quarter to get up and over the number, or that one deal that you have to take at a discount to get the revenue right may impact gross margin. And so then in addition to those, there were some ones like the number of dials that anyone would make in a week, or the number of meetings face-to-face that my reps would have, or maybe the number of demos that they did. In fact, demos are so important, I actually put them on this list twice. But what we're seeing is the technology has changed the way we do things. There's a lot of great campaigns around building nurturing campaigns with tools that, quite honestly, in some cases can bludgeon your base, can bludgeon your customers with just a ton of emails or a ton of calls, and multiply that by the number of competitors you've got. And what you see are buyers just stopping to respond. Plus, with caller ID and closed facilities, you can't even just sort of wander by anymore. So what are we going to do? Well, I want to encourage you to think about KPIs from a fresh perspective. And the perspective is something that we call, or I call at least, Keystone KPIs. And if you've heard of Keystone habits, it's where you make one small change that lead to others. In other words, what are those leverage points that you have that get you somewhere? And research has been done that if you have a morning routine, you get up and do the same thing every morning, that allows you to show up at the office with more organized thoughts. You end up with better health. You actually end up happier in terms of the way they measure that. They found that people who lay their gym clothes out in the morning, when the alarm goes off, have a greater tendency to get out of bed, put on their gym clothes and go for a run or go to the gym or whatever it might be. In fact, even making your bed, research has shown, is a keystone habit because it shows a greater sense of well-being, wanting to bring things together. They've demonstrated they have better budgeting skills if you make your bed, and also higher productivity. And so the question then that we want to keep in mind are, what are those things, fairly small number, that allow us each day to start and push us in the right direction? What are the ideas and habits that get our sellers, in other words, selling? So here's a couple of areas that I want you to kind of think about. Number one, I've talked about this idea of what's in process, what's happening as we're going along. One of the key things we're looking at people talking about today is, where are your new opportunities coming from? Because especially in the last 20 months, finding new leads has been the most difficult part of the entire sales process. And a couple of things that people are measuring, how many are coming from referrals? In other words, are the customers helping you to find new business? And that really gives you two advantages. One, referrals are the easiest business to convert from opportunity to close, because the trust that they have in the relationship that already exists gets transferred for you as the seller. But more importantly, it also is a measure of true customer satisfaction. Do your customers like you enough to refer you out to the other people that they know in the industry? Are they willing to do invitations? Do they delight in the business you do with them, or do they just endure? And so referrals gives you two metrics in one. Is it lower cost to produce because I only have to ask? Are my customers really satisfied? And it's an easier one to convert. Number two, McKinsey did a study, and they found that high-performing sales reps actually spent 22% more of their week in front of customers, communicating directly with them. And in front, in this case, could mean a telephone call, or it could mean a face-to-face meeting. And so one of the things that should be measured is, how often are your reps really on the phone or face-to-face with prospects and customers, versus how much time are they doing other paperwork? One of the things McKinsey found in this study is that these top reps, the ones that spend 22% more time in front of customers, that they produce 4 times as much revenue as the bottom 30%. And so what are the metrics of your best performers doing? And how do you start to measure and get some of your average and maybe even below average producers to move in some of those ways? Now, you've got to make sure that what they're in front of that prospect saying are the right things. So there's training and those things required as well. But it's a great metric to, are my people outbound focused or are they inbound focused? And then the last one, Michelle called this a calculated KPI, but conversion rates at each step. What are your averages? When you go from leads to opportunities to proposals to close, for example, what's your best rep? What's your average? What's the lowest? One of the things that happens is just a result of the math is if you can make a single digit, call it 4%, 5%, better improvement from lead to opportunity, that's going to have significant impact on your bottom line, because if even the rest of the conversion rates stay the same, you're all there. And I ask customers, it's like, what's your conversion rates at each stage in your process, whatever your process is? And a lot of times I get blank stares. It's like, well, we really should know that. And I'm thinking, yes, you should, because you don't know where the real problem is. Is it a skill in closing? Is it a skill in communicating the value of your product? Is it a skill in understanding what it is the customer is looking for? Or are you generating bad leads? So that's another KPI we're seeing a lot. And then the revenue related KPIs, in addition to revenue growth and gross profit, because those will never go away, is this whole idea around channel. Right now, omni-channel, the fact that our customers want to get our products the way they want to get them, when they want to get them. And that might be face-to-face, it might be an inside sales force, it might be online, it might be through distribution, or some combination of all of those. But rather than just look at what's the contribution margin per channel, they're looking, what's the revenue per channel? They're looking at contribution margins. What's the real adder that they're making to my business? And so if I look at going online, I don't really care necessarily what the revenue is per se, but is it adding money to the bottom line in terms of what I do? Is it taking away from somewhere else? Is the cost of servicing that channel less? And so by looking and breaking it out by channel, I get a sense of what channel should I be feeding with more growth and what channels maybe have I overinvested in. Second one, what's my margin per customer? I worked for a company one time that when I joined them, their largest customer, and this is frequently seen in a lot of cases, was one of their lowest margin customers. And they always wrote that off because, well, yes, it's low margin business, but it gives us great manufacturing scale, and it's good revenue, and they pay in slow time, but they always pay. Well, we began to dig into what was really the margin that customer was contributing. What we found was they were horrible at forecasting. And so it really messed with our inventory. And that in general, even though they were the largest customer, they had twice as much inventory on hand per time unit as anyone else. And so that was a part of the cost we hadn't thought about. And the net result of all of that was they went to the customer and we renegotiated sort of the terms of the agreement, got rid of some products, sold them rights to manufacture some products, and kept some of the ones that were profitable. Because even if it's high volume, if you're not making money on it, it's not worth it. And then two other ones that Michelle and I have been looking at with some customers lately. One is around the idea of, where are my customers who have been here and gone away, maybe for 18 months or for 24 months, 36 months? When have they come back, and why are they coming back? And how much business are they buying? Again, that recapture rate over, say, maybe 6-month averages is a great way to say, are we improving the way in which we engage with our customers, or are we seeing further decline? You can also flip this around and say, what of my big customers are departing over time? And I know that a lot of organizations have different purchase rates. Sometimes people will buy in bulk and then not be back for a while. You've got to figure out what the right time period to measure that is for you. But look at the customers that are coming back or going away. And then finally, revenue growth by new customer tiers. We all look at who are our top customers, who are our mid customers, but how does that change? Who's moving in, who's moving out? What products or strategies or channels are moving and growing people into the organization? And again, where do I need to feed that? Where am I gaining market share? And where am I overinvested? Because sometimes the solution is not spending more, It's just spending those dollars in the right places. Those are a couple of ideas around the idea of in process and related to revenue. If you've got a question, you can chat us, you can hit the Q&A. Either one will be ways in which we can answer your questions as it relates to KPIs. So here's a great question. And that is, how do you know that a KPI is really working? Michelle talked about sort of how people revisit it and everything else. I think that from my experience, at least in managing KPIs, you get a sense over time that that this measurement is either helping to grow the business or isn't. And when you sit and look at them, weekly or monthly, it's going to give you a sense of kind of, where you are and where you're growing. We had another question that just came in about the linkage between CRMs and KPIs. And absolutely, a CRM properly configured, or a CRM where the data is being collected and you have some kind of a report generator or a data analysis tool that runs over the top of it, can give you all of these things. For example, I just worked with someone not long ago to measure time. In our particular case, this was a very specific one we wanted to know, which was, what was the difference between what we originally estimated a transaction to be to what it actually closed at? And were we, getting numbers that were too optimistic early on that caused more scramble towards the end of the funnel? And all of that was built on a Salesforce report. We looked at the metrics we tracked, turned out we had to, and again, one metric that we wanted around original contract value. It was very easy to track all the way through. So yes, use your CRM. It's a great way to leverage that. Any other questions?
Russ, I have a question for you, and I know this is something that comes up, in organizations that we work with. How do we go about even just getting started? So for somebody that's really looking to set some new KPIs, particularly as it relates to training, how do we go about kind of getting started and figuring out what makes the most sense?
Sure. I think experience is really great here. One of the questions I like to ask our clients when we engage with them on doing KPI measurements is, I ask the regional managers or the branch managers, those who are sort of rolling up numbers, what do you track? How do you know whether or not someone's going to be able to make that deal close or not? Because any sales manager who's been in their role for a while has a filter that they put on each of their sales reps. And there's some things they're looking at. And as I talk to more people in the organization, some of those consistently come out. And then we put those together and we say, hey, what about these? Can we track them? If we can't track them easily, again, to Michelle's point earlier, maybe we won't track that now, but we'll look at something that's related to it. So mine your managers for that information, and then apply what they've got. And that's a great starting point. And from there, if you have the luxury of having somebody who can look at your data, they can maybe start to see trends, or just as a management team, when you're looking at things and things are going better than you expect, ask yourself why. And if they're not going as well as you expect, ask yourself why too. One of the questions I asked a client just this week, they normally see a bit of a slump in the summertime. And I said, when could you predict that was going to be an issue? Was it an issue in lead generation last month or the month before? When was the right time to accelerate whatever the right action was to be able to get over a slump in July? And we're off kind of studying that right now. So when we find out the answer, maybe we'll do another webinar on it.
And not really a question, but we did get a comment just about sharing KPIs across organizations, really seeing this being helpful managing partners. So I think that's a great point, not only within your organization, but if you are a franchise or you are an OEM with distribution, it's a great way to really set some common KPIs and share with your business partners.
In our training programs, we give away points. And the winner of the most points at the end of the session gets a $30 gift card. Second place gets 20, third place gets 10. But it's enough to get the competitive juices of salespeople flowing. And so I always believe that when you're sharing metrics, the competitors don't want to be in the bottom half of the curve. And they're going to push to get to the top. And if you've got the makeup of salespeople who want to be number one, it will lift the organization. So what are some big immediate best practices? You know, as Michelle talked about, do the metrics that you're using today still make sense? Face-to-face meetings maybe doesn't make sense. Demos, depending on your industry, may make sense. You really need to kind of to figure out whether it's a qualifying demo or it's a closing demo. We don't have time to talk about that today, but if anyone would like more information, send an email to that contact@thebrooksgroup.com and I'll follow up with you. Can they become more in-process oriented? Can you look the middle of July and start doing things now and tuning things now to make July or August or September look better? Try to find the ones that unlock growth, this Keystone KPI approach that I talked about. Very important to figure out what kind of feeds overall. And then in addition to revenue and margin, be looking for metrics around efficiency that have to do with leads, time customers, conversion rates, contribution, et cetera. We had a couple of questions come in right towards the end. You know, can KPIs be tied to impact? And the answer is yes, absolutely, especially the one about measuring conversion rates at various stages of the selling process. That's really tied in that way. If you have a way of grading your leads, either by some kind of qualification basis coming in or by market segment coming in, those are both really important as you feed the impact process and you feed CRM. The idea of having a process that you can go back in and troubleshoot and metrics against that in terms of here's where we should be going with this. Both of those are ideal partners to being able to deliver better performance. We just had another question came in. I'm trying to read it here quickly, Michelle. Maybe you mention our sponsor again while I try to get to the answer here.
I would absolutely be delighted to mention our sponsor, the Summer Variety Pack. And again, brand new for this year. It's a completely new offering. If you use Impact, if you have been through Impact training in the past, it's a great way to revisit those concepts and really hone in on some specific skills for a refresher. If you haven't used Impact before, if you're looking for some skills-based training, it's a good way to dip your toe into the pool. Yes, I made that summer reference there. It's a great way to dip your toe into the pool and try it out. And really, again, focus on some bite-sized, easily digestible, easy to fit into the summer schedule skills development. And Russ, any information on that question if you'd like to share with us?
Yes, I did get a chance to read it. The question had to do with, we are a company that's owned by a private equity firm. What is the next private equity firm that we will likely sell to be looking at in terms of key KPIs? That's a difficult question to answer without knowing kind of at what stage you are, because different equity firms look for different things as they go forward. What I would encourage you to do, this is maybe a little bit in reverse, but think about the kinds of companies that you would likely be sold to. Look at the companies they've been buying, and you can probably get a sense from sort of looking at how they either talk about it in the press release or the kinds of things that are written up about the private equity firm, what they say at different conferences, what they're looking for. Because some are looking for, around the idea of being able to improve margins. Some are looking to accelerate growth. Some are looking for consolidation. Some want market share plays where they're high market share. Others are medium market share, but where there's an advantage to grow. So it really depends on where you are. So sorry, I can't give you a specific answer on that. And we are going to go to the ball game. We're going to take a little time off along with everybody else. And so we are not going to have our regular happy half hour in August. So our next session is going to be in September, and we are changing the time. We know that people are back to work. Therefore, instead of it being a virtual happy half hour, we are going to make it a virtual lunch. And there's going to be some more creative naming around that, I'm sure, before we come up with it. But Friday, September 17th. We're going to do it at noon Eastern, and we would love for you all to be there. I believe, although we don't have the specific topic picked, Michelle, correct me if I'm wrong, but you've been looking a lot lately at the whole idea of the buyer's journey and how do salespeople better understand what the customers are looking for in order to buy and to make those transactions easier. So I think we're going to do some conversations around that. Is that correct?
That is correct. So we are going to, again, really look at what's most important to the buyer. We spend a lot of time talking about your sellers, and we're going to put ourselves in the buyer's shoes for at least the next session, maybe a few after that. And we do hope you'll join us for lunch if you're on the East Coast. Bring your breakfast if you're on the West Coast. And we look forward to seeing you when the weather gets hopefully a little bit cooler.
All right, everyone. Have a great summer. See you in September.
Thank you. Bye-bye.